Now, your common exam, what we would have done in a typical scenario, we would have had all students writing the exact same questions. So here, for example, is a common exam that has 5 questions. Now, if I look at a versioned exam, what we mean by versioned is that each question can have multiple versions of the topic or learning outcome. So for example, in this version, question 1, students can be assigned either question A, B, or C. Question 2, all students get the same question. Question 3, students can be assigned A or B. 4, they can be assigned A, B, or C. And question 5, they can be assigned A or B. This is a really useful strategy when giving exams that are non-proctored, or even if you decide that you want to do this during a proctored exam. eClass can automatically version individual questions for you. Now, when I say automatically, I don't mean that it will write the questions for you, but it can make decisions about giving out the questions randomly. So in a common exam, all students have the same exam. On eClass, we can shuffle the questions. We can also shuffle the responses within that. So students may receive the same questions in a different order, or the same questions in a different order with different response orders, or the same questions in the same order with different response orders. And that's great because it prevents students from saying, oh, question 4 is C and question 2 is A. But what if we want to make things a little bit more secure? In versioning, in this example here, with question 1 having 3 options, 2 all being the same, 3 having 2 options, 4 having 3 options, and 5 having 2 options, the probability of students having the same exam is 1 out of 36. If I have a class of 36 students, it's very unlikely that students will receive the same exam. Questions can also be shuffled. So here I can tell eClass to give it one of these multiple versions, and then I can say this is question 1 for one student and question 4 for another student. So it's very difficult for students to sit down and write an exam together, or even talk about question 2 or 3 or 4, because it's unlikely that they're going to have the same question. If you choose to version, a common issue that's raised is a question of fairness. To maintain fairness across your versioned questions, I suggest ensuring questions are measuring the same learning outcome and ensuring questions are the same level of difficulty. For example, you might use Bloom's taxonomy to ensure that these questions are the same level of difficulty. Let's talk a bit about what that looks like. So here I have an example of a versionable multiple choice. So my learning outcome is, by the end of the class, students will describe the formation of a variety of geological landmarks. My first question on my traditional exam is, if a stream flows underneath a glacier, a tunnel may be formed. Over time, if sediment deposits build in these tunnels, which of the following is most likely to form? And students have 4 options there. Now, if I want to write a question that is for the same learning outcome, I'm going to be thinking about how can I talk about the formation of a variety of geological landmarks. There's another question that was on the same exam. Is this a candidate for being a version of question A? Question B says, which of the following describes a drumlin? And it gives 4 different options for a description of a geological landmark. Unfortunately, this is not a great example of a versionable question, because while it's at a very similar level to question A, it does not describe the formation of a variety of geological landmarks. It focuses on describing the landmark itself. So we need another question. This is another candidate. We're focused on formation here because it says which describes the formation of a caldera. There's 4 different potential answers, which is the same as my question A, and that's a good thing. And you'll note that it's around the same topic, describing the formation of geological landmarks. Even though the landmarks are different, it's still having students apply that information. Something to note about question A and question B is question B here does require more reading. That may or may not be an issue for your exams, depending on how much reading is required throughout. It's something to note. However, for my 2 prior qualities, this does match. It meets the same learning outcome, and it's about the same level. I'm asking what forms and how can I describe that formation? Now that we've decided this is a good option for question B, let's try and write a third question. Here we have question C, which is at the top. What can we learn from the movement and formation of moraines? Again, we're talking about the geological landmark, moraines, and it's asking what can we learn from these? Now, if I look at my outcomes, students will describe the formation. Technically, this does talk about the formation because I'm asking about what we can learn from this formation. However, this is an application question, and it's quite a bit higher level than explain or describe the formation of another geological landmark. So while this is an okay question, it doesn't necessarily offer itself as a good example of a version for this question. So I would suggest against using it. Coming up with another question. As a result of glacier movement, which of the following is most likely to form at the edge of a glacier? Here, I'm focused on the formation of the landmark, specifically which forms at the edge of a glacier. I've given the 4 options. You'll note that these 4 options are pretty similar throughout my questions, and that's done by design because the question itself is different, but it's asking students to apply that knowledge of the formation of a variety of landmarks and discern which landmark are we talking about if we're talking about this type of formation. Again, this requires much less reading than question B. At this point, I may or may not choose to rephrase question B, or I might choose to only go with question A and C. But I can say that looking at the level of the question and the outcome, question C does match up with question A and B. In the end, these 3 questions can all be versioned to one question on the exam. So students will receive one of either question A, question B, or question C. All of these need to be worth the same in order to consider these to be fair. After you've considered writing different versions of multiple choice, you're going to want to learn how to version on eClass. In the next part of this video, Joshua Westlake will teach us just that.
The first thing we have to do when setting up a question with multiple variations is to go into our question bank and make sure that we have our categories set up properly. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on the gear in the top right here and click on More. And I'm going to scroll down to where it says Question Bank, and I'm going to click on Categories. So the categories kind of act like folders for your questions. So let's say I'm doing a midterm. What I'm going to do is where it says Parent Category here, I'm going to select Top for my course, and I'm going to name this one Midterm and add category. So that's a new parent category. And now, since we have a question that has 3 different versions, we need to have a category specifically for that question. So I'm going to select midterm as my parent category. And since this is our first question of the exam, we're going to call this question 1 and add category. So now we have a subcategory for our midterm called question 1. You can have as many of these subcategories as you'd like. So if you have a subcategory called Chapter 1, and then within that Chapter 1 subcategory, you can have your Question 1 variations, your Question 2 variations, and so on. The important thing here when we're talking about shuffling questions is that all of the question variations have to be contained in one category, and they have to be by themselves. They can't be in there with other questions that are not part of that variation set. So now what we're going to do is create our questions. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on the Questions tab in the top left here. And then I'm going to make sure that I have my question 1 category selected. And then we'll click on Create a New Question and Multiple Choice. And we're just going to copy in our question from our Word document here. So this one's question 1, so I like to call it Q001, and then I'll put in version A. And the question text, I'll just copy in here. Make sure that number is deleted. Then I'll scroll down and put in the choices. So we've got A, Caldera. B is Drumlins. C is Esker. And D is Valley. And let's check our document one more time. So the correct answer is C. So we're going to find our option C here. And where it says grade, I'm going to select 100% and save. So now you'll see our Q001A shows up in our list of questions under the question 1 category. So now I'm going to quickly create the other 2 questions. And then when we start again, you'll see all 3 of those questions in this list. Okay, so now you can see that I've added all 3 different versions of this question into my question 1 category here. So now all that's left to do is to add the questions into my quiz. So I'm going to go back to my course page. And for this example, I'm using a quiz called Midterm Exam. So I'll click on that. And then I'm going to go to the gear and click on Edit Quiz. And now I'm going to click on the Add button on the right here. And we're going to select a random question. And you'll see that I can now select from any of my categories that I have in my question bank. So I'm going to select question 1. And for the number of random questions, I only want one of these questions coming into any individual student's exam. So I'm going to type in 1 and then click Add Random Question. And now you can see that there is one random question from that category added into my quiz. So now every student will get one of those 3 questions, and that's it.